putting questions in the chat?
Yeah, questions are in the chat.
I don't see it.
Not there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Now, after 6 weeks in the streets, many pivot to reimagine society and public safety. Breonna Taylor and George Floyd's murders were a tipping point. And now we want an anti-racist agenda that prioritizes Black Lives Matter, diversity, and collective power in policing, public life, education, health, etc. Discover ways forward via our amazing panel. We have some great guests here today that we look forward to diving into amazing conversation. So today, they will share how to navigate our past. They will share how to help shape and unite our future. The Justice Project is driven by PAC and over 100 faith, clergy, and tribal elders as we stand together to call for equity and justice for all. In the spirit of Martin Luther King's justice, today we listen to understand as authentic civic leaders share how moral courage can change Santa Clara County and all of the cities therein. Hello, everyone, and welcome on Zoom and Facebook Live. We hope that you're having watch parties and prepared to dive in to this deep discussion about how to be anti-racist. I'm Reverend Ray. I am the Executive Director of PAC, which stands for People Acting in Community Together. We are a multi-faith, multicultural organizers who develop leaders to speak truth to power. We demand equal justice for all, and we call to uplift anti-racism, and we stand to protect those who are marginalized. We push mayors, judges, cities, and county officials to get on board to denounce structural racism and construct a new social contract so everyone can thrive and enjoy the same quality of life in equity and justice. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we have a very vibrant panel, a few second-time visitors. So I'd like to take the time to introduce our leaders today. How are you guys doing? And hope you all are doing well.
Hello, hello.
Great.
Hi. Doing great.
So first, I'd like to introduce Alicia. Alicia, let the folks know who you are, where you're from, what you represent, and what's motivating you and giving you fuel during this pandemic and crisis that we're experiencing.
Absolutely. I'm Alicia Partee. I'm one of the pastors at Maranatha Christian Center in San Jose, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And what's really driving me is I am passionate about creating a world, a place, a community where my Black boys, my Black grandchildren, and the community can thrive, there's less inequality, hopefully eliminated inequality. I am passionate about giving a voice to people that because of a label that society have put on us can't speak. I am passionate about being a voice for those who have experienced so much trauma, all they can do is weep. I want to be a voice and I want to make a change in Santa Clara first.
Ashe. Thank you, Reverend Alicia, and thank you for joining us. Next on our panel, we have Kareem. Kareem, welcome. Let the folks know who you are, what organization you're representing, and what's giving you fuel today.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Kareem Syed. I'm the Community Outreach Youth Director for West Valley Muslim Association. I'm also part of the Saratoga Ministerial Council and the Los Gatos Clergy Council. And what gives me fire is I consider myself, first and foremost, identifying as part of the human family. And when my brothers and sisters are in pain and have been in pain for untold number of years, crying out for change and justice, I mean, as a family member, how could we even allow that to happen, right? So for me, I think if you were to ask me how I feel very disturbed, have a lot of anger. Hopefully I mean, Reverend Ray said I could unleash, so just be ready. It's gonna come out. But I mean, for me, it's my brothers and sisters in humanity are feelings, and we need to do something about it. So that's kind of what drives me.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome, my brother Kareem, to the show. Next on the panel is my friend who is a part of many clergy caucuses and does great work in our community, Diane. Diane, introduce yourself, what organization you're with, and what is giving you fuel during this time.
Hi, I'm Diane Fisher. So I'm the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council. That is a group of a coalition of all the Jewish synagogues and organizations in the South Bay area that is collected under the Jewish Federation. And our purpose is to build community. That's what our purpose is: interfaith community, relations with government and schools, with various ethnic groups, to strengthen our democracy and to strengthen how we all thrive here together in Santa Clara County. And I will say what's giving me fuel right now is young people. We had a meeting last night with a group that of 20-year-olds that were just like not sitting this out, so just so ready to embrace change, learning, just like, I'm here. And so I can't not be encouraged by when I see young people like that.
So shalom and welcome, Diane. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to hearing more of your voice. Next on the panel, we had Cuahcihuatl, and we want you to say your name with conviction and boldness so we can learn how to say it, what organization you represent, and what is giving you gas in this moment.
Hello, my name is Cuahcihuatl, Trinidad. I'm the Vice President of Program Operations here at Conxion. I represent Native Voice TV as well. And my fuel is making a change, within our community, So what we do is we educate everybody and everyone about our culture and about what we do. So this way they're understanding, and they're accepting, and then it becomes a norm, and it also to teach our children to know who they are and where they come from. So this way they have some kind of purpose when they're growing up and they're in the community, and they're not just all over the place, but they know where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to do, and it's based on respect. So that's what I do.
Thank you, Cuahcihuatl, for joining us today. And we also look forward to your voice and perspective on this panel today. Next, we have Rory Meer. Rory, tell us who you are, what set you're repping, if you would, and what's giving you gas during this season of pandemic.
Yeah, sure thing. And thank you so much for having me. I'm Rory Meer. I'm with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm the grassroots advocacy organizer in the foundation. So I am lucky enough to be working with a network of grassroots groups across the country who are aligned in the principles for the EFF. And it's essentially that our human rights don't end right when there's fancy technical mumbo jumbo. Like, we need to defend our rights online as we do offline. And I have a background from activist organizing, particularly in queer and feminist spaces in New York City. So it's weird to be away from my community right now, being here on the West Coast, but something that makes me really excited is seeing that organizing happening and seeing the victories that have been happening as well. There have been some big wins. For example, Boston banning face recognition recently, which I'll be excited to talk more about later. But yeah, the little wins are giving me the gas right now.
All right, well, welcome. Hey, we know you're from the East Coast, but in the words of Tupac, we give you some California love, all right?
Thank you so much.
All right, and last but not least, we were happy to have him last week. We have Sajid back with us today. So Sajid, reacquaint us again with you, who you are, what organization you represent, and what is giving you gas during this season.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Reverend Ray, for having me back. My name is Sajid Khan. I'm representing myself today. I'm a San Jose born and raised Bay Area resident. My day job is as a public defender with the Santa Clara County Alternate Defender's Office. I'm also a member of the local Muslim community, having grown up here in the South Bay area, predominantly with the Muslim Community Association in Santa Clara, the MCA. What's giving me gas is what inspires me to get to work every day, which is honoring the lives of the people that I've been assigned to represent, and also honoring the communities that they come from and specifically fighting to humanize the people that I represent, and specifically humanize and restore the humanity of people ensnared in the criminal justice system. And so I'm honored to be here and share my thoughts with y'all. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sajid, and happy to have you back. You and Alicia are second-time visitors, and we are grateful to have you again. So welcome all of our panelists. Right now, I want to take a moment to offer not just a prayer, but a moment of silence for those who continue to lose their life to COVID-19, to all of our brothers and sisters who have lost their life because of the perversion of hate, racism, oppression here in our county and abroad. So I just want to take a moment of silence to recognize the death of Vanessa. So a moment of silence we shall take. And now I'd just like to give thanks to the moment, whereas we recognize our faith leaders, our tribal elders, and our clergy, and all the things that bring us together in the name of love. We move beyond just love as an idea, but a reality. And above all things, love wins. So I'm grateful for, in our faith communities, we are in a right relationship with our creators, a right relationship with one another, and a right relationship with creation and nature. So in that spirit, we move forth to reimagine what a world would look like where all are seen as human, where all are seen as equal, where there are no factions and no casting systems. But when I see my brother, he is my brother. And when I see my sister, she is my sister, and we are equal. So in the name of love and peace and justice for all, we present this moment. Shalom, Amin, Ashe. All right, can we dive in, guys? All right, so the first question is around the idea of what it means to be anti-racist. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, is trending as racial justice uprising continues. Professor Kendi says that to be anti-racist is more than just a phrase. He sees it as a state of being. I see it also as a call to action to uphold what it means to be anti-racist. And when we talk about anti-racist, we talk about policies. We talk about systematic racism that is captured in policies that create social economical divide, that create the perpetuation of the oppression of a particular people. When right now with Black Lives Matter, we're talking about particularly policies that are centric to the oppression of Black bodies. So the question I would have for you today is, in this culture with policies and practices that are construction of racism and bigotry and white supremacy, and how do you feel and how does it look for you for this deconstruction of this racist system that we live in? So I'd like to start with Kareem.
Okay. I mean, for me, the way I discuss it or talk about it is that being an anti-racist is a way of life. And like kind of what you're referring to and what's referred to in the book is that it's not about policies. It's not just about changing systems. It's literally, if we want to sustain and build on the momentum that we're seeing right now, we need to make it a way of life. It has to be programmed within us. It has to be a part of our being, right? And I'm one of those faith individuals that previously used to espouse that, oh, all human beings are created equal and that, you know, we want fairness and equality for everyone. But it was just lip service because it has to literally be like ingrained in our essence, meaning that whenever we're interacting with our society in any way, shape, or form, so be it in the grocery store, be it in the library, be it in our schools, if we see something that doesn't make sense, we have to speak up and say something. Like, it's not acceptable to have racist language or racist attitudes or racist actions taking place in front of our eyes and not do anything, right? It means that we have to do something. Because if we're not doing something, all we're doing is making those voices that encourage this abhorrent behavior feel like it's normal, right? And in order to make that change, is what we all have to do is, as individuals, is recognize that, yes, we as human beings, you know, we can't change the world. Sometimes we feel that we can't make all this huge impact, but we're not asked to. All we're being asked to do is be as human as possible. And if we're human in our personal spaces and we all collectively decide and make that commitment to do so, I think then we'll see the sustained change that we want to see, right? I mean, for me, it's hard because, again, I'm a child of immigrants, a brown man of privilege, right? My family came here more recently. Again, we come from a privileged background. I grew up in Saratoga, right? So I didn't have to see or deal with any of the situations that my Black brothers and sisters in America have ever had to deal with. So even though I might have been aware of it, I didn't really do anything about it, right? And again, I think that goes back to of having that commitment to being able to live it as my life, like it has to be a part of my being.
Alicia, how do you respond to this idea of deconstructing the system of racism and bigotry and white supremacy in the context of being anti-racist?
Absolutely. And I actually had a chance to go through the book as well. When I think of it, first of all, I think of it as like our body. Our body has many parts. We have hands, feet, eyes, and each part has a purpose, and we need the whole body. And I think for us to take action is going to come, many of us, we're going to work in many different lanes, but we're all traveling in the same direction. So I think it's for many people will have to take action in different arenas, but as long as we keep our foot on the gas, we will do it. Now, I think when I was reading the book, Take Action stood out, challenging race inequality in an active way, not just talking about it. It talked about segregation, it talked about biological racism, and it talked about colorism. And for me, in my context and where I serve, I mean, I actually think I'm going to take action and start with our youth. And I'm going to talk about maybe a little later, a little more mindfulness, but how do we start from a younger age, changing the way they see themselves, changing the things that's on TV and in media, and that is shaping their social construct and who they are. And I just feel my lane is going to hopefully equip our young people to know who they really are, our Black boys and girls, to understand their heart, to understand their history and the richness of it, and to allow that to be a positive side of them that hopefully they can take with them as we all take action to hopefully advance equality in Santa Clara County. So it starts with me. It starts with myself. It's of course it's in others as well, but I want to get in my lane and do what I do and make sure I am intentionally challenging inequality and taking action every day.
Amen. So it starts with me. Now, Roy, go ahead and jump in and give me some of your ideas.
Definitely. And I want to reflect a lot of what Alicia just said is kind of pushing back on this neutrality that when you're neutral in a racist system, you are participating in the racism, that it requires proactive pushing back against that. And I, of course, come from a tech activism perspective. And I think you see that a lot with, a new face recognition technology or what have you, a new algorithm is approached as this kind of, oh, we're just creating it, presenting it. It's not related to race. It's not a part of any systemic oppression. And you see it quickly adopts those characteristics. And there needs to be more mindfulness in the tech sector of, from the onset and through development, how can I ensure that this technology is equitable and not disproportionately impacting disadvantaged peoples? So I think that's an incredibly important thing throughout the whole process within that field and elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Roy. And it's going to be interesting to hear more how the rising of technology plays a role in creating a further racial divide. So I'm going to skip down to our next question, and this is for Cuahcihuatl and for Diane and for Sajid. So anti-racism can awaken and drive a collective racial justice action as we see happening today. Yet division and systemic inequality stems or is rooted in our nation's unresolved dehumanization and oppression of Black Americans, of Black people. So the question is, how can we heal the mindset of racism? How can we heal the mindset of white supremacy and anti-Blackness? And Sajid, go ahead and jump in and lead the way.
Well, the first thing is, I think there has to be a recognition of the history of this country. There has to be a recognition of our century of our history and legacy of slavery, our history and legacy of lynching, and then more recently, our history and legacy of mass incarceration, all of which have consumed the lives and bodies of Black men and women in our communities and left generational impact and generational trauma on those communities. And we have to educate ourselves about that history and then recognize that we are not healed from that history, we are not immune from that history, and that history is still impacting us today. We have to get past the naivete to believe that these things, slavery, lynching, mass incarceration, are things of the past, and recognizing that they are very much present with us in our everyday today in the United States. And then more specifically, I think there has to be a recognition that where our system currently holds that legacy of slavery and lynching is within our criminal justice system. Our system of mass incarceration that is largely rooted in the dehumanization of Black men and women in our country. And so in order for us to heal, it really requires deeply systemic change to our criminal justice system, because that criminal legal system, our jails and our prisons, and the way in which we process people that manifest some of the behaviors that would be expected from that generational trauma is where we need to do the most healing and the most work. And we also see some of the most pervasive reflections and manifestations of this anti-Black culture. They are most present within our criminal legal system, where we dehumanize people and call them by not calling them by their names, by calling them felons and offenders and convicts and labeling them, and then ultimately making it more difficult for them to reintegrate into our communities, separating families. So I think that again, just to recap, there needs to be this emphasis on the history of our country, where we are in the continuum of that history, and then affirmatively working to dismantle our system of mass incarceration and reimagining how we enforce our laws and how we adjudicate the wide spectrum of human misbehavior.
Yeah. Thank you, Sajid. The young folks would say that recognizing history is a process of being woke, right? Young folks use the term of being woke. Back in the day, Public Enemy used a phrase, and I forget, and I'll come back to it. I had it right on the tip of my tongue. But it's a conscious connected. We cannot be connected to reimagining today if we are disconnected from our historical presence. Great share. Diane, what are your thoughts in relationship to this idea of healing relational to this context of anti-racism?
I really like how we're talking about healing from each of our own lanes, right? Alicia said, I'm in my lane and doing what, where I can work. And so the lane that I have to work in is the faith community. That's where I work. And I really, in thinking about the qualities that people need to have to work on this healing, I was thinking about empathy. And I just want to share, like, from a Jewish perspective, where I started to go with what do I need to do to have more empathy for brothers and sisters who have had this experience. And it has to do with listening. And it made me realize that there's a Jewish prayer that is traditionally said every single day, the Shema. And that word Shema just means listen. And it's just kind of an amazing thing that the most basic core prayer of my faith is just basically the translation of the Hebrew is listen, not to God, to listen to all of us. We are all connected to each other. That's the daily prayer. That's the essence of it. Just listen to your fellow human being. We are all interdependent and connected to each other. And in previous times, in younger years, that was like a rote thing that I could say in Hebrew. But this concept of really, really listening right now is making me, I feel like is moving me to a new place. And I feel like that's a place I can help my community do. And then authenticity of where you are at and who you are, knowing yourself, right? Authenticity is what opens you to change, opens you to not just use slogans, but to really think about your own privilege and your own role in the system. So listening and authentic understanding of your own role in the system.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Diane, because I do believe listening is a way of building relationships. It's a way of building bridges. It takes moral courage to actually listen to the pain of someone else. And I think there is a dualism of healing that needs to take place in our cities and counties here in Santa Clara. So thank you for sharing. Now, stick a pin in it, Reverend Alicia, because I know I need to talk to you about this idea of healing and trauma that Sajid talked to from a historic perspective. But before I do that, Cuahcihuatl, go ahead and share your ideas relational to this idea of healing in the mindset of racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness.
Well, from what I think of, you know, when my grandchildren ask me questions and they're already experiencing this, you know, there's a lot of historical trauma and we're all trying to heal from it. And it's passed down, you know, it's passed down. So, you know, whatever has been passed down to me, I try not to pass down it to my grandchildren, my children. And I try to get them to understand and look at things in a different way, you know, listen, having them speak up, you know, but they're still experiencing it through the school books. You know, when they're in class in history, my grandson just went through it the other day, not too long ago before this COVID thing, and they're talking about, you know, tribal things and the Aztecs and all kinds of stuff. And he spoke up against it, you know, because this is what he learned, you know, and I teach him ahead of time, this is not us. They wrote our history, you know, so this is our history. You listen to our elders, you know what I mean? You ask questions, you know, and if you're not sure about that, ask me questions, you know. And so I think that in order to start healing, things need to be changed about what's being put out there. About, you know, they're going to talk about Native American stuff in the history book, but it's all bad, you know. So when our children listen, especially our children, you know, it's not good. So it continues. So in order to start healing, those school books need to be changed. The way people think about Native Americans have to be changed, you know. Everything that's put out there about us should be changed. It should be asked about before they even put it out there. You know, I went to a museum, they had different things about us, and I couldn't believe the stuff they had. And it was a real beautiful setup, but it was disrespectful, you know what I mean? And so when my children or grandchildren see that, you know, it's a reflection of what they're, you know, experiencing, and it needs to be changed in order to start making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Cuahcihuatl. And I hear you clearly. In order for healing to take place, the true narrative, the true story must be told. To give you an example, the other day, I have no idea what today is. Does anyone else like me have trouble keeping up with the days? On Wednesday, my friend Osama and I were talking before the clergy caucus meeting, and we were talking about the telling of stories. And he referenced how we love Denzel Washington, but the depiction of Malcolm X by Denzel Washington is not a true telling of the story, right? It's a telling of a story that creates a viewership. But to create healing, we really must tell the true story. And as Diane said, when we tell the true story, it creates the opportunity to listen authentically, and that will promote healing. So, but before we move to my next question, even though I said that Sajid and Diane and Cuahcihuatl would answer, I have a clinician on here that can talk about the impact of trauma and healing. So Alicia, give us about 2 minutes of dialogue relational to the impact of historical hurt, pain, relational to white supremacy, racism, and bigotry, and how do we move to a place of healing?
Yeah. So there was some things I wanted to bring out that I had read in something called the Greater Good magazine, because it kind of ties into what many of you are saying on the panel today, but kind of being mindful and maintaining a moment by moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our body sensations, our environment through a nurturing lens. Because we all know that policing in America in general, Santa Clara County, like other authoritative bodies and institutions, you know, they paint a picture of us, right? There's a picture that's painted in their mind. By the time a person is 12 years old, they've already developed an aggressive and violent approach to handling and treating Black and brown human beings, right? And so, and actually a cadet, even in the police academy, before they come out, you know, their whole mindset is they have these images, these films, all of these artifacts in our social constructs and things that's shaping the way they treat people, Black and brown specifically. And then you have legislation that actually, in a judicial and executive system that actually supports that. So I think, first of all, we have to address this culture, this war culture. We have to address and really face past, present images, archetypes and symbols that we have. And we need to change it. We should not settle when we see something in the media or on TV or in books that are not representative of who we are. Then we have to change it. We have to demand that these things are changed. And because until we do that, until it's taught, we know that racism is taught. And so we have to challenge all of these things. And that's the first step, right? And then of course, policy, we know that we have to do that. But I guess from a practical standpoint, we have to create a place where we can talk about it. I love having panels, but I have some white people that have been asking me, well, what can I do? And, having candid conversations, of course, is a start. But this is the hard part about this type of trauma is it keeps happening. So, it's so hard for clinicians to be able to say, well, do this and you'll feel better. It's not happening because, as soon as we think we get past it, it happens again. And every time it happens in our community, it happens to us. I cry when I watch the videos because I can feel their pain, but also because I've had a son that was beat by the police. I think I mentioned it before when I worked in Santa Clara County, and I'm working with the police department and mental health, and thank God, because it would have even been worse. They didn't know who he was at first, but so we have a lot of work to do. But I think, if I can say this too, a police officer needs to be mindful, right? When we come in contact, when someone has had a criminal offense, was it a year ago? Was it 20 years ago? We have a tendency to say once someone has done something, that's who they are. So all these things are mindset changes, and it is going to be challenging, and it is going to take time. And it starts with us working with our children, teaching them, giving them new archetypes, giving them new media sources, and demanding that those that put out anything that is incongruent with who we are as a people is removed. And so that's just a start. But the trauma, I wish I could say, I think we're just going to have to come together. If we can get clinicians out there willing that have a heart for what's going on, I think this is going to be a long-term, this is a journey. This is not going to happen overnight because we continue to be re-traumatized. So we're going to need some help. And this is not an overnight fix. And I'm so grateful for all my brothers and sisters on the phone, because it's going to take all of us.
Reverend, you make some great points. You can give me solutions, and even in solutions, I already have triggers all by themselves. But if these things aren't resolved and nothing changes, the solutions that you're giving are for naught, because I continue to experience the same trauma over and over and over again. Now that speaks to a lot of other things that I'd love to talk about today, but we don't have enough time. I'm going to move to the next question. The next question deals with this idea of assimilation. I'm going to start with you, Kareem, because you grew up in Saratoga, right? You mentioned about privilege. I grew up in Florida. I grew up privileged as well. Everything about my life, even though I'm not privileged because I live in a Black body, I still have some appreciations of what it means. So this next question talks about this moment. This moment was birthed out of history. We just didn't get here overnight. America's political and economic power is tied to slavery. Many of in this country, historical wealth is tied to slavery, the enslavement of Africans. Yet, Black Americans moved from slavery in that unjust system, and we fought for civil rights that we all enjoy, everyone under the sun. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voters' Rights of 1965 was birthed out of the Civil Rights Act. So there are many things that we all enjoy. Yet, many who assimilate, the assimilation, often use the white supremacy playbook to multiply anti-Blackness, asserting ideologies that erase and demonize Blackness. So the question we ask is, how can ethnic communities work together to combat this trend of assimilation? Kareem, go ahead and lean into it real strong, brother.
Yeah, man, I mean, it's again, it goes back to that truth. We got to come back to the truth. And I'll just tell a personal example, which like is embarrassing in hindsight, but it's like, again, I grew up in Saratoga. I mean, privileged. Most of my friends were either white or maybe Asian, right? And I remember the first time I went to Richmond, and I went to Richmond because my cousin was doing some, she's a sociologist and she was doing a study there. So she went into the urban community there and was doing some research. So she said, hey, can you come and visit me? I was like, yeah, sure. So once I pick her up from her hotel, she's like, hey, let's go somewhere to eat. So I was like, hey, where do you want to go? She's like, oh, there's a mall nearby, let's go. I go into the mall and I'm uncomfortable. And the reason I'm uncomfortable is the first time that I'm in a mall where everybody else is Black. And I was uncomfortable. And it's ridiculous. Like, how did that happen? Like, how was it that I go into a space I've never seen or interacted with these human beings before? They're literally color of their skin just a little bit different, and I'm uncomfortable. That means that this, like what we've been talking about, is like the indoctrination of the media, of the TV shows, of the music that we consume, is literally perpetuating this nonsense, right? And it's not going away anytime soon until we first recognize that it's filthy and it's full of nonsense, right? So I think the first and foremost for especially communities, and I think it goes to every community, is let's get to the truth. I mean, for me, the biggest pain right now is like, there's no truth anymore. There's an assault on truth, on honesty. And, when I work with my fellow clergy and, they have a lot of patience with me, but for me, it's like, I don't understand what the purpose of faith is right now in this world that we're living in. Because I think that all faiths, the fundamental principle that all of us have is that truth is truth, and that we have to speak the truth. Now, we might disagree on how we arrive in implementing that truth, but the one thing we have to recognize is truth is truth. And what I'm seeing is even from my own community, I'm talking about the Muslim immigrant community, is we refuse to acknowledge the truth. And if you can't acknowledge the truth when your faith is literally dictating to you, and you have example over example of all faiths all over the world, everyone's saying the same thing, that we have to get to the truth. You have to recognize the truth. Stop being so self-obsessed with your own desires and trying to, gain more worldly wealth, that you have to recognize the reality of what's happening around you. We continue to perpetuate the same nonsense. And if we don't recognize that's what our faith is telling us to do and come to that truth, then we're not going to be able to solve it. But it comes first and foremost, especially people of faith, we need to be on the front line of this and get back to reminding people, hey, the truth matters. And it's the first place that we need to start from. And once we recognize that and are able to perpetuate that and speak to that, I think then we'll start seeing our communities, being able to understand and see what they haven't been able to see before.
Yeah, great share, Kareem. And Kareem, I need you to know that you're not alone, because I share this sentiment with Black folks, because we have assimilated to this self-sufficient role, but yet when we find ourselves talking about Black on Black crime, I read in a Facebook page thread, and I try to stay away from other threads, and I definitely don't comment, but that if Black folks stop killing Black folks, then maybe white folks will value Black lives. I'm like, well, no, we could stop killing Black lives, and that won't change the system. So that's a way of assimilating, where now we are perpetuating the same language that the oppressor uses. So this idea of assimilation is very dangerous, but if we collectively recognize this, we can move forward to one healing and dismantling this notion of a subconscious brainwashing, if you would. Rory, go ahead and lean in. I mean, you're from the the New York City, the Big Apple, and there's a lot of cultures there. So I'm sure you've seen many things. So go ahead and lean into this question idea of assimilation and oppressive processes that come out of that.
For sure. And I think, yeah, coming from a city with a lot of, I think the most diverse population Queens is in the US, looking at kind of shared priorities with individual identities is an incredibly important part, and being able to organize with everyone having different concerns, but when everyone who comes together is on the margins, you wind up sharing a lot of concerns as well. I think, again, I'm very tech-minded at the moment, but thinking about, it might seem like a neutral change to our daily norm to use social media and such. There's these little biases that some people are totally unaffected by, but many people around on the margins are disproportionately harmed by. So you have one group buying convenience and the other group receiving harm in this kind of unjust transfer. So I think, yeah, in uniting diverse communities, there's a lot of fights that we share. And again, I'm part of the Electronic Frontier Alliance, which is a network, not just in New York, but in many major cities across the country. But we find these handful of principles that we all unite behind, that everyone's entitled to privacy, to security, freedom of expression and creativity and knowledge, and being able to unite behind those shared values, even with different shades of concerns across these communities. It's incredibly important.
Thank you, Rory. Absolutely. So now this next question is for Diane, Cuahcihuatl, and Sajid. Now, at any time, as we're sharing these questions, any of you who are not invited, feel free to jump in. Diane, I'll start with you, and then Cuahcihuatl, and then Sajid. So talk about ways to overcome the racial divide as diverse communities of color. How can we reframe the pain of cultural bigotry and anti-Blackness and infuse true solidarity with hope, humanity, and love? Diane, go ahead and lean into that for us.
I think Kareem brought up a really important image that is exactly what I was going to talk about too, which is about showing up, right? Just going to Richmond was a really important experience, right? And I honestly, in my role as the director of the JCRC, most of the time, I'm just encouraging people, show up for each other. Like, this is a lot of the time, like the first step, it's not rocket science, but you need to be there to have that experience that's awkward, but then you can move from there, right? If you stay in your, and I'm from Saratoga too, right? If you stay here, nothing's gonna happen. And you made me think of an example for my community. We held a joint voting rights Passover Seder with the African American Community Service Agency. You may be familiar with it on 6th and Julian, right? Great community center. We're from a community center. We brought our two community centers together, and we did a program with Doris Cordell and Rabbi Melanie Aaron, and talking about how voting rights have really been compromised. And most of my community members that I brought to the African American Community Service Center had never been there before, right? And the room was amazing vibe. It was like just packed with people who had not been in proximity, right? That's what Brian Stevenson talks about, right? You need to be proximate to the issues you want to deal with and the people you want to know and help with making change in your community, right? So we were in this, like, I'm sure uncomfortable for many people, but awesome proximate experience with each other. And I think that's like the most important thing that I have, to offer to making that change, is to show up.
Right. Thanks, Diane. And that takes courage, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Alicia, you had your hand up for a quick second?
I did, so I've lived as an immigrant for the past 7 years out of America. I just came back in December. And one of the biggest things that helped me with assimilation versus integration was building bridges. What I found is the majority was afraid It was the fear. I had many people said they wouldn't hire foreigners because they felt like they would come in and change a culture or environment and they didn't know what to expect, or they didn't, you know, I was in Norway and it's a very homogeneous country. And one of the things I think, and I like what you're saying, is building bridges. Some people I met, they had never interacted with a Black person before. So what can we do to build bridges where we're actually visiting each other? When we get off the phone, we go our separate ways. And sometimes it looks like segregation, which is actually what he talks about in the anti-racism book. But what can we do to bring the communities together and find out that we have much more in common than we have differently? And then, of course, as you said, speak up. If I see something happening that's not right, don't be afraid to film it. Don't be afraid to speak up, you know, because sometimes, you know, when I experienced racism, it was a Norwegian that spoke up for me, and that helped. And so, you know, it's nice when somebody else can speak up. It's hard for me to speak up when it's happening to me. We see that in all the people that are dying at the hands of police, but speaking up. So building bridges and speaking up, I think, are key, and to actively do something to bring people together, reduce fear, and build right pictures of us as people.
Thank you, Rev, for sharing that experience. It's very important. Show up, experience, have the courage. And when we interact and engage with one another, then we in our own communities can speak up and not be complicit with the idea of white supremacy, racism, or bigotry, or perpetuate that same thing, even though we ourselves are oppressed and subjugated to this idea of racism. Cuahcihuatl, go ahead and lean in and share your ideas and thoughts of this question.
Well, you know, I think that everything's based on respect, and you teach it at home, you know, and you educate. Education is a thing for me, right? So we put on a lot of events here in Santa Clara County, and I invite everybody to come. And so when a different nationality comes to our event, I'm open. If I see them, I'll come and invite them in and explain to them what's going on, you know, and ask them to, you know, share their information with us and you know, let them experience some of the things. So if they don't know, they'll just look and walk away. But if they do know, now they take interest. You take interest in each other. You're able to share, you know, and, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, say hello and you know, come, you know, communicate with each other, you know, and educate each other on, you know, what's going on with your culture, what's going on in your community, you know, what they can do when they come in, you know, they can participate as well in one way or another. So that's how I feel that, you know, we can help, you know, the community in that way.
And thank you for the invitation. I'll be coming soon because there's still so much learning. There's still so much more learning I have and so much I want to know. Sajid, go ahead and lean in and give us your take.
A couple thoughts. One is when we think about love, I've often heard that love is a verb, or love has to be a verb, that it has to manifest in actions. And similarly, anti-racism also must be a verb. It's something that just can't be said. It has to be something that manifests in our behaviors and our actions. And so how does it manifest in our daily lives? I think one is really challenging the way in which we speak about the other, especially, again, rooted in language that is often sprouting from our criminal legal system, really challenging the way in which we talk about the other, talking about people of color, and particularly talking about Black people in our communities, and really challenging the way that we think of them and speak of them, especially those that have done what we communally accept as bad things. So do we see these people, do we see Black people that have committed crimes as bad people, as felons, as convicts, or are we seeing their collective humanity and recognizing their path towards redemption and honoring that path towards redemption with actual action? That's one thought. An additional thought in terms of manifesting anti-racism and manifesting love as verbs is what's already been discussed by some of my fellow panelists: getting uncomfortable, going to communities and restaurants and businesses that we otherwise might not go to. My younger sister, she's into fashion, so she curated a huge list of Black-owned fashion designers and Black-owned brands. And that influenced me to change my Instagram feed. So now my Instagram feed looks different, and now I'm shopping differently. I'm trying to eat at Black-owned businesses, restaurants and coffee shops. And in doing so, we show up, we introduce ourselves to one another. My kids get to know other people of different walks of life, and there becomes this real beautiful community fabric and strength that builds from that. So these small but very profound things about changing the way that we operate within this world, down to the way we shop, down to the way we consume, what we eat. And then I think we've already talked about it, getting a bit uncomfortable, which is kind of the corollary to courage, getting uncomfortable, going to places that we otherwise might not visit, and also showing up for issues and services and programs that may not be relevant to our respective communities. I grew up in a Muslim community that was very Muslim centric. So we were predominantly showing up for Muslim related issues that were often related to things that were abroad in the Middle East or in India or Pakistan or in Northern Africa or in Bosnia. But we often didn't show up for issues that didn't really have a direct connection to the Muslim community. And so now, as people of faith and people in our communities, are we showing up for the things that may not be directly impacting us, but that are impacting our brothers and sisters in humanity? So those are some of the thoughts on how we can manifest that love and that anti-racism in action.
Great shares, great shares. PACT has something called the Belong Circles, where we get to know, we get to lean in, much like Diane when our Jewish Community Center went to the Afro-American Center and hung out with Milan, and when we break those barriers. But keeping it moving, I mean, if we were like children, my children, Jalen and Sophia, when they were children, we grew up in a community where there were Muslims and there were Jews and there were Christians and there were Catholic, and I'm sure there were atheists. But because they were children, the only thing they knew that these were their friends. Now, as an adult, I made designations by last names, right? By the way they dress, but through the eyes of children, they just saw them as friends. And that is the greatest way of knowing when they go into each other's household. And we have parents that allow them just to experience love and community just because that's what kids do. So great sharing. Hey, I want to dive into the next question. This is a tipping point. George Floyd, his murder, his lynching that we all saw was the tipping point. Many saw an unarmed man and a compliant Black man and had empathy. They saw this. But the question is, when we saw Eric Garner and many others, Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice, we didn't have the same response. This nation didn't have the same concern. So the question is, how do we transcend the worldview which criminalizes Black lives and resolve to fight for all survivors of police terror? So I want to go back to Sajid, because when we talk about police terror and we talk about this imaging of criminalizing Black lives, I mean, how do we change that? So Sajid, go ahead and lead us the way and give us some insight.
I think Ms. Fisher talked about it earlier. Empathy is really the key. It's a recognition that every Black person in our community was once a child, that they were once someone's son or daughter, that they are human beings. I mean, that's what the premise of the Black Lives Matter movement is all about, is a recognition that we traditionally have not honored the humanity of Black people in our communities, and therefore a demand and an assertion that that humanity not only be restored, but it be affirmed affirmatively. And so again, I've referenced this already. It starts, I think, with really reforming our criminal legal system, because when we talk about trauma, we talk about generational trauma. Much of the crime that we see Black people or people of color involved in are manifestations of generational trauma. But we tend to silo those crimes and see them instead of manifestations of bad people, or and just kind of demonize people in that way. But then when we zoom out a bit and we say, okay, these behaviors are not a reflection of someone being inherently bad, they are manifestations of trauma, then we have a way to look at that behavior with a lens of the person's humanity and saying, what can we do to help rehabilitate and redeem that person? And oftentimes that answer will not involve incarcerating them, separating them from their families, and then in turn inflicting even more generational trauma on these already very damaged communities. So I think it all starts with empathy and a recognition of humanity, which is why this Black Lives Matter movement is as imperative and important as it is. But it can't be in words alone. It really has to have this far-reaching impact. And I think, again, it starts in our criminal legal system, where we recognize the humanity of people that have done bad things and honor their humanity, and then ultimately honor their capacity for redemption, and then help people reintegrate so that we can heal these very damaged communities that have been hurt for so long.
Thank you, Sajid. Now, Cuahcihuatl, how do you see this from your Native American lens?
You know, listening to Sajid, it's the same thing. It's, you know, our people have been going through this forever. It started way back, you know, with the boarding schools and cutting their hair, and you know, just generational trauma is historical for us, as you know. And you know, getting people to change their thoughts, like you were saying, you know, how do we get them to look at it in different ways? It's gonna have to take just a change of mindset, you know, and in order for them to become, I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. So anyways, Black Lives Matter, and all of them do, all of us do, you know, and we need to support each other in doing this, you know, and stand up, you know. And as our children grow, you know, we have to teach them at home, you know, how to protect themselves and what to do. And yeah, we would love for them to have a better, you know, neighborhood and dealing with these police officers in a better way. And, you know, but, you know, like I was talking to Sheila earlier, and I was telling her, I have to teach my children, my grandchildren, what to expect. You know, racism, you're gonna meet it, you know. And although we would like to not meet it, they're going to. You know, with my daughters, I had to teach them, you have two things against you. When you're Native, you're a woman, and you're Chicana. So you're gonna get it from all different ways, but this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna know who you are. You're gonna know what to say. You're gonna know your worth, you know. And now here I am teaching my grandsons, when a police officer, you know, you meet them and they question you, you know, you have to be respectful. You know what I mean? Watch what you say. Don't have an attitude, you know, because it's scary. You know, they're of color. I have grandsons. One is real light complected, green eyes. The other one is light complected with a light, you know, with light, an afro, you know, he's half black. So we got to teach them. And I tell my daughter, you have to teach them how they're going to be, you know, how things are going to be. If you don't teach them how they are, they're not going to know where they come from. And they're not going to know how to be in society. And they're not going to know how, when the police officers or someone, you know, approaches them, you know. And so, you know, like, you know, listening to Sajid once again, talking about manifesting love and stuff like that, it's just going to be something hard. You know, I'm listening at these questions, and I'm kind of baffled. It's not going to be that easy, you know, but it's going to start at home. You're going to teach them. You're going to have to teach your communities. You have to bring them in. You have to, you know, what we teach is, it's called in Lakesh, right? I am you, you are my other me, you know? So when you know, the golden word, how do you say, treat people the way you want to be treated. And that has to be taught. And if no one does, then it's going to continue to be like this. You know, how is it okay for our leaders of the United States and everywhere else, act the way they do and then they expect us to not do these things or not say these things or not speak up, you know, because that's just how it is. Well, it's not going to be that way no more, you know, and here we are. And it's just, this is an emotional thing for me. You know, I have to, you know, keep up and keep teaching and keep educating, like I said, and keep sharing and talk about it and speak up and stand up and everything else.
Yeah. I am you and you are me. Say it again.
I am
Say it again.
you. I am you and you are my other me.
You are my other me. And how do I say that in my native language?
In your
See if you-
language, in
No,
Lakesh,
what-
it's called.
In Lakesh.
In Lakesh. I am
In
you,
Lakesh.
you are my other me.
Thank you, Cuahcihuatl. Diane, well, I mean, how do we transcend this worldview that criminalizes Black lives and the resolve to fight for all survivors of police terror? We're speaking specifically of police terror. How do we do this? How do we change this worldview?
The one other human quality that I wanted to raise up at this point is the just belief in redemption of all of us. And I learned some thinking about this because I participated in the origin of the faith-based reentry group when it was first created in Santa Clara County. And it was an amazing experience to sit with a group of people that were just willing to try to address the system as imperfect as it was, but this lift up the humanity of every person that had been embroiled in that system and believe in redemption of every person. And, you know, I don't know how the rest of the system, the prosecutorial system, the police system incorporates that belief in redemption, but I saw it on the reentry end of it working very strongly. And actually, I would really like to know what's going on with that effort right now. Like, I haven't been in touch with it recently, and I would really like to know if it has continued to grow, if it's working, if we all need to get engaged more with that effort. But I think sitting in that space kind of grows your sense of empathy and grows your belief in redemption. And yeah, Sajid, you're gonna help me out there?
No, just raising my hand to go next, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Is that okay,
No,
Reverend Ray?
Oh, you're good, Sajid. We're good. If
Okay.
Diane's good, I'm good, you're good, we're all good.
Thank you. One thing having you, Reverend Ray, hearing the question from you again, survivors of police terror, I think it's really important how we frame who those people are. I think oftentimes we think of police terror when we see the worst end of it, which is the killing of George Floyd. We see the killing of Stephon Clark and Eric Gardner. But what we often forget is the terror that falls below the headlines, that is not caught on cell phone video. It is the terror that is inflicted on communities of color here in San Jose, here in Milpitas, in Campbell, in Sunnyvale, in the neighborhoods that are oft forgotten and overlooked. It's the terror that looks like young Latino men being pulled over for no reason, or being sat on curbs and being photographed and questioned because of alleged gang affiliations. It looks like people getting pulled over for riding their bikes in the wrong direction on the street, or not having a bike with an appropriate headlamp, only to be frisked and searched and dehumanized on our city streets. That type of terror is happening all the time and is not going to be caught on the news, and is not going to be published in any on Now This or anything like that. And that type of terror does traumatize communities and really does inflict violence upon communities of color, particularly in San Jose and Santa Clara County, Latino and Black communities. And so I just wanted to kind of reframe or kind of remind all of us about the subtle terror that really impacts our communities of color right here in Santa Clara County.
Thank you, Sajid, for sharing. Kareem, go ahead and lean in. And how do we change this worldview, this Black body as an object of police terror?
In terms of teaching, again, it has to go back to recognizing we're human. Like when you were talking about your children, they recognize themselves as human. They don't see anything else. And that's what we have to keep nurturing and encouraging and keep growing with that, right? Stop otherizing our own selves and removing ourselves from humanity, and then, you know, setting ourselves apart from our fellow brothers and sisters. And for me, when I honestly look at what was different about this time, about this tipping point, I honestly believe it's because of COVID-19. Is because this is the first time where you weren't able to look away. And if you watched, you know, Chappelle's short that he did on YouTube, where one of the things he mentioned was when the previous incident took place, he was also watching Kobe trying to drop 61, right? We are not able to watch Kobe drop 61, right? We're not able to turn ourselves away. So now you were faced with seeing another human being, right? That you weren't able to objectify and think of the other, but you literally saw him sitting there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and you couldn't look away. And then even if you tried to look away, you had to go look back at it. Like it was just in your face. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that the reason that we have this momentum is not because it's something new. It's because we as human beings finally had a moment where there was like a timeout for all of humanity. And then we had to sit there and look and say, like, this is what we've become. And the reality was, guess what? This is the way it's always been. It's just that we haven't been noticing. And I think it's that moment now that we're noticing. We're like, oh my God, what is going on? And, you know, within my own city that I'm working with in Los Gatos, you know, we had like a protest. We had, you know, my African-American mother who went up there. I'm talking about like, you know, mother in humanity. And she talked about her daughter, or my daughter, right, went through school from elementary to middle school to high school, being referred to as the N-word on multiple occasions. And she's continually bringing it up. And what ended up happening? Nothing happened. And then she was telling me about how she's just tired of voicing. And, you know, for me, what I think is that, especially for us, those who are privileged, it's time to do something. And it's not time to go back to the same system and expect them to do something different. Like one of the things some of the people were, you know, discussing was, oh, let's go to the city council. Let's go back to the police. Let's go to the superintendent. No, what we need to do is be that voice. That once we hear one of our brothers and sisters in humanity suffering, we need to gather together and go do something about it. Meaning that, for example, if I'm in that school system and like I'm part of like, say like a clergy congregation, and then I have other fellow clergy, we need to band together and just show up and just go there and demand what, you know, the right action to take place for our own brothers and sisters in humanity. We can't rely on the systems that are presently in place because they haven't solved it and they will not solve it. Why? Because we keep looking away. But now, you know, thank God that we're actually paying attention a little bit more than we used to, but we have to keep that momentum going. We have to stay woke. We have to keep seeing. And like, you know, like all of you have been saying, like Dan's been saying, we have to be present. We have to show up. And just like in ending, I just wanted to say, Cuahcihuatl, I feel blessed to be in your presence. I feel you. And I pray that, you know, that I can be someone who as an individual can feel your pain and work with you for you to heal. Because, you know, one of the things that I've heard a lot of the times is that, you know, we're talking about healing. What's the situation? The way I look at it is my brother and sister has just been run over by a car. And then I need to help heal them. And then what's happening is that car's reversing back and running back over them again, right? That's what needs to stop. We first need to stop that car from running them over. And then we have to go and reach out and actually help them heal. So I just wanted to say, Cuahcihuatl, I love you. And thank you for sharing this space with me.
Very passionate, very powerful, Kareem. Thank you so much.
Can I just ask Kareem, I know I just want to ask Kareem to like call me to show up in Los Gatos, because I was like one of the very few people showing up all last year when they would try to bring people together and no one was showing up. So I'm there with you.
Thank you, Kareem.
Thank you for your love, your compassion. Yes, I'm going to not make you stop seeing me is my motto and mantra till I leave this place. So thank you for sharing that powerful word. Alicia, go ahead and lean in.
You know, I guess for me, as I'm sitting here, I'm so grateful to be here, because I don't know if you guys ever felt like you screamed so much that you just stopped fighting. And I so agree with you that COVID slowed us down. We had to go back to just having the essentials, and we tuned in, because I'm like, what's different for me? I was Black with, you know, when I was born. What's different for me right now? Why am I want to take action now? And I feel like what I've been going, hey, this is happening, and no one was listening. And now all of a sudden you have people listening, and I'm grateful. And I really hope that beyond this call that there's some action. But I think just remembering, like you guys all said already, be mindful, understand you first. what are you experiencing and what are you communicating when you deal with Black people and brown people? And start with you and change that narrative, change your narrative first, right? We do that in cognitive, we change the story, you know, instead of going in, you'd be like, whoa, what's happening here? Let me hold my purse. Wait a minute, this is a restaurant. I don't have to start with you, and then start with the people around you and keep going out for there. But I guess I just want to say, thank you for hearing. Thank you for hearing. And thank you.
Amen to that, Reverend. Thank you for hearing. And we will not sit quietly. As a reminder, before I get to my last two questions, it's 6 is for Rory and 7 is for Sajid, and I'll give you all the opportunity to give me your last reflections on this idea of anti-racist. But on the 19th of July at Emmanuel Baptist Church at 2 o'clock, the beloved community will be holding an action with Mayor Sam Liccardo. And listen, at PAC, we have a PICO principle that says no permanent enemies, no permanent allies, but only permanent interests. So I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, moderate, the interest of the people is all we care about, which is equity and equality. And we're grateful that the mayor has graciously accepted our invitation. We look to support him in every area of equity and justice. And I don't know who said it's not easy. Cuahcihuatl said, no, this is not easy. You have to have courage to transcend the historical oppression that has happened. And you have to have courage and wisdom to make this place a place of justice and equity. So right now we're praying for Mayor Sam. We know that he can do it. And we're just trying to support him and lift him up and present the voices of the community. As Diane said, listening, we must listen. So we're gracious that he has taken the time to listen, because in that we're praying that he will find truth, and in that provide equity and justice for all, not just with policing, but housing, the homelessness, education, a digital divide, all of the above. Now, speaking of digital divide, Roy, you like that transition? My question is for Roy. Now that artificial intelligence and data-driven algorithms are being used by social media and by law enforcement to target Black lives for criminal surveillance to high interest loans, Ring branded doorbells and the neighborhood apps are tools used to tag young men of color moving throughout neighborhoods and often deem them as suspects. The San Jose Police Department has also teamed up with a group to give free ring bells out and collect data. So they're using it to collect data. So Rory, how can we unite to address technology biases in the heart of America's Silicon Valley?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I think it's something that when we talk about systemic racism and carceral mindset and kind of a carceral approach to people, it's important to see how that is embodied or takes shape in a lot of these technological systems. We have a system of surveillance capitalism is the norm here in Silicon Valley. And that's something that, you know, maybe many people, maybe even most people don't mind losing some privacy, but that's rooted in kind of a mindset of, I have nothing to hide, therefore I'm not one of the bad people who will have their privacy invaded. So I think identifying that while we're kind of looking for convenience from various social medias and Amazon's Ring program, what we're actually exchanging is control. They are gaining more control over attention, more control over how our communities take shape and how these communities are policed. When the police and other state entities use surveillance technology, they have their own set, but they really love these corporate state collaborations. Ring is often something that your local police department will give you a free Ring camera. And it's something, again, it's very much embodies this idea of like, I don't want the camera facing inside my house, but I'm totally comfortable having it be by my front door looking at everyone else's house. So thinking about this idea of privacy, yeah, I think it's an individual concern for many, many people, but even if you're not that worried about it for yourself, it is kind of perpetuating this carceral mindset and a community where people can't be fully autonomous and free to not only live their daily life, but also when it comes to protests. It chills free speech and our ability to freely engage with each other when we have this kind of cloak of big surveillance and lack of security.
Great, thank you for sharing. I mean, I think we need to learn more about how it's used, weaponized, opposed to a tool of safety. It's actually being a tool of weaponizing and collecting data. And we need to be very mindful of that here in Silicon Valley.
Unfortunately, I do need to go right now, but I just want to thank you real quick so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing from all of you again soon.
Thank you so much, Rory, for your time. And if we wanted to find you and follow you, how could we do that?
The easiest way would be to reach out to me at rory@eff.org. I also highly recommend checking out eff.org/join. You can donate there or check out the blog where we write about these things. But anyone watching now, definitely feel free to reach out to my email and I'd be happy to connect you to folks.
Thank you, Rory, for your time and your insight. Be blessed, be safe, and
you too.
We appreciate your time with us.
Thank you so much,
All right,
everyone.
Our last question is for Sajid. Sajid, last week we visited DA issues, and as the POA has backed away from its strong call to hold bigoted officers accountable, we look to how the district attorney has a history of shielding the police from accountability after killings and violence. So Sajid, can you call the Santa Clara County DA's office out about its record and impact on Black Lives Matter? You face quick reprisal from the DA Rosen. So talk about our local system and dynamic shifts, the dynamic shifts of San Francisco's office, DA's office, and its prosecutory discretion.
Yeah, well, for a bit of background, you know, when we think of law enforcement, our minds tend to go directly to police departments. And given my experience as a public defender in this community, I recognize that law enforcement is largely comprised of two major parts, and police departments being one of them, but the other portion being our local district attorney's office. And our DA's office, and not only this DA's office, but DA's offices across our state and across our country are the arbiters of police conduct. And what I have experienced in my years as a public defender in this county is that district attorneys are not holding police officers accountable for their misbehaviors, for their use of excessive force, for their illegal policing of our communities, and instead they are actually perpetuating that police violence and that police terror that I outlined earlier. When we think about it, or when we kind of break it down, when police officers, for example, stop someone illegally in our communities, or when they use excessive force during a contact with a community member, it is the DA's office that is then tasked with deciding whether to go forward with the prosecution of that community member that may have been arrested, or in the alternative to potentially prosecute a police officer for using excessive force, or ultimately sometimes for killing community members in our county. What I have seen and what we see is that this DA's office has not traditionally held police officers accountable, and instead has not prosecuted police officers for their excessive force, and has not prosecuted police officers when they kill our fellow community members here in this county. And even worse, what happens is the DA's office here will turn around and prosecute the very victims of police violence with what we perceive and what we believe to be frivolous crimes, like resisting arrest or assaulting a police officer, to help shield police officers from liability and culpability in those scenarios. Or will use what we believe to be illegally collected evidence, or arguably illegally collected evidence, rather than disciplining police officers for engaging in those types of behaviors. So what I've called for, and what I will continue to demand, and what I'm asking our communities to demand, is that DA's offices be held to account for their role in perpetuating police violence, perpetuating police brutality, police terror upon our communities, and that we do that in a very active way every day, and holding our DA's office accountable. And unless and until they do that, we will demand systemic change, and we will also work to find a district attorney and deputy district attorneys that do in fact hold police officers accountable for their misconduct and for their misbehaviors, and honor the lives of community members that are suffering the terror of police violence in our communities. And on one last point on that front is oftentimes that police terror is most prevalent and most present in what is often described as gang policing, or policing that is done in the name of policing quote unquote gang related behaviors or gang related neighborhoods or community members. And often that always falls on the backs of people of color in our communities, whether they be Latinx members of our community or Asian members of our community or Black members of our community. And it's my perspective is that policing is racist at its core. And ultimately we see the DA's office relying on that racist policing to then effectuate racist prosecutions. And it becomes this machine of dehumanization of people of color in our community. So my biggest call for action is for our communities to rethink what gang behavior is, what gang members look like, what gang crime is and what it isn't, and to demand a different way of responding to those behaviors in our community, both by police and by our local DA's office.
Thank you so much, Sajid, for giving us that capsulation of how anti-Blackness and racism perpetuates and shows up in policing and some of the processes that we're experiencing here in our very own county and city. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your time. Diane, Alicia, Cuahcihuatl, Kareem, and Sajid, and in his absence and leaving. So I thank you. So I want to give you the opportunity to take 60 seconds to share some parting thoughts with us. And Cuahcihuatl, I want to start with you.
I would just say with all this is going on, just know that everybody should back each other up. You know what I mean? So, show up, like you said, listen, share. I know Black Lives Matters, everybody's stepping up, which is great. And there's other things in the community that we need backup, to back each other up, whatever thing it is, send it out and people can go, it could be something for the natives. It could be something for, the Chicanos or whatever. But if people gather together, more people show up, people of different colors all together, we can make things change, so.
Thank you, Cuahcihuatl. Thank you for showing up today. We appreciate your heart. We appreciate your tears, and we are here with you. We're all in. Reverend Alicia?
I would just say what I said before, just take action, challenge racial inequality, fight to eliminate it, change your old assumptions and hopefully the assumptions of others around you, and just intentionally make the world more equal in the lane that God has given you, in your lane.
Thank you, Rev. Sajid.
I've already spoken a lot. I've issued some calls for action. For right now, I'm just feeling very grateful to be a part of this conversation, to be a part of a conversation that is attempting to manifest values like empathy, compassion, redemption, community. And so I'm very education. And so I'm excited to I'm grateful to have been a part of the conversation and hopeful that these values that we've been talking about manifest moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sajid. Diane.
I just want to express gratitude also to you, Reverend Ray. Pulling together these groups of conversations are so valuable, and just really grateful that you have been doing this work now for many weeks, and grateful to now have a new network of folks that I'm going to be showing up for. And I learned so much myself from being in this conversation, and I'll just make that commitment that I promise to keep not looking away and to keep listening and to keep trying to make anti-racism and love a verb as in my life. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. We really appreciate you. Kareem.
Actually, just quickly touch on something on Rory said, and like what's been happening in the cities of West Valley, which are Saratoga, Los Gatos, Campbell, is that they've seen an increase in crime, especially pre-COVID. So the response of a lot of these cities was to increase surveillance, right? Get ring doorbells, asking people to increase, instead of asking the question on why is there an increase in crime, like in terms of burglaries, right? There's a reason for it. And that culture of fear is what's kind of the root at increasing this level of otherization of other people and doing things that are not actually a part of our human nature to do, right? So for my closing remarks, is just that we have to remember, like everyone said, is that educate ourselves, come to the truth, be ready to be uncomfortable, and don't fear. We're all human beings on this planet. We all bleed red. We're all the same. And as long as we recognize that and remember that and combat fear with that love and compassion, I think we'll see the change that we're hoping and praying we're going to see.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for showing up. My last comments from the early 1400s, when race was defined by the country of Portugal and the onslaught of slavery began because of the demonizing of Black bodies. From the racial laws of Lyndon B. Johnson to Nixon to Reagan to Bill Clinton, we must all recognize that to be anti-racist is not just an idea, but it is a call to uphold an injection into our culture, policies and practices that deconstruct racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. So I hope all of you have enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for your heart, your insight, your intuitiveness. We are better because of the conversations that we have. We are better because we're listening and we're being authentic. Those are Diane's words. And that's who we want to be, because we all belong. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Henry.
Next week, next Thursday, join us together again here as we seek to create a more just, diverse California and a stronger and more united Santa Clara County and all of its cities. And next week, we'll dive into reimagining public safety in the era of Black Lives Matter and its uprising. So thank you again for joining us. I pray you guys safe. I pray your families blessed. And I appreciate your sacrifice and time giving with us this evening. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And don't hang up yet, because I want